Hello, everyone. Welcome to Inside Talk Show. I am Carla Elizondo. We're going to go inside because it's an inside job, team. It's an inside job. Life is a self-study program. Inside job. Cannot depend on our outer faculties, what we see, what we hear, what we smell, what we taste, what we touch. We have got to go inside. Okay. All right. We are on chapter 7, continuing Neville Goddard's reading of The Power of Awareness. The Power of Awareness, chapter 7 by Neville Goddard. It's called Attitude. Don't we all need a lesson on tude, girlfriend? This is a really good one. So just soften those ears. You're a new person today. It's Thursday, getting ready for the weekend. And just enjoy and listen. Attitude. Experiments recently conducted by Merle Lawrence from Princeton and Albert Ames from Dartmouth in the latter's psychology laboratory at Hanover, New Hampshire, prove that what you see when you look at something depends not so much on what is there as on the assumption you make when you look. So it proved that what you see when you look at something depends not so much on what is there as on the assumption you make when you look. Since what we believe to be the real physical world is actually only an assumptive world, it is not surprising that these experiments prove that what appears to be solid reality is actually the result of expectations or assumptions. That's like that double split experiment when you watch the particle, the wave experiment. You can watch that on YouTube. I went down a rabbit hole of quantum physics with that. It's very interesting. It just brings more weight and understanding, and anybody can grasp it. Watch a few videos. It's really interesting. Okay. So it says, since what we believe to be the real physical world is actually only an assumptive world, it is not surprising that these experiments prove that what appears to be solid reality is actually the result of expectations or assumptions. Your assumptions determine not only what you see, but also what you do, for they govern all your conscious and subconscious movements toward the fulfillment of themselves. Over a century ago, this truth was studied by Emerson as follows. As the world was plastic and fluid in the hands of God, so it is ever so much of his attributes as we bring to it. To ignorance and sin, it is flint. They adapt themselves to it as they may, but in proportion as a man has anything in him divine, the firmament follows before him and takes his signet and form. Very wordy, very old English, very not our times. So to break that down, as the world was plastic and fluid in the hands of God. So in the hands of God, i.e. imagination, Neville Goddard describes God or the universal intelligence as our higher faculty of imagination, that godlike quality that we have, those higher faculties that makes man godlike, as opposed to a dog, a horse, a cow. They have instinct. Animals have instinct. We have intuition, memory, imagination, reason. We have those 6 higher faculties. So Emerson was basically saying that in imagination or with God, the world was plastic and fluid. It could be anything we want it to be. But depending on where we put our thoughts and imagination, they adapt themselves and become firm, become actually objective things in the world, depending on how we form that substance. Your assumption is the hand of God molding the firmament into the image of that which you assume. The assumption of the wish fulfilled is the high tide which lifts you easily off the bar of the senses where you have so long lain stranded. Oh, that's why I love, some of you know we do a daily morning reading at 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern. And Jen Tini, my lovely reading partner that's in that group, she pointed out when we were going over this chapter, so it says your assumption is the hand of God molding the firmament into the image of that which you assume. The assumption of the wish fulfilled. So assuming our wish, assuming that we're already there, using our imagination to already be there mentally, emotionally, just so soaked in that. You know, when you close your eyes and you dream and you're just there. Oh my goodness. The assumption of that wish fulfilled is the high tide, which lifts you easily off the bar of the senses. So being in that imagination lifts us above what we can see, hear, smell, taste, touch, just like a sandbar, you know, like the tide that comes in and lifts the water up, the boat up, whatever up from just a barren sandbar, just the sun is beating down. So that imagination, the assumption of the wish fulfilled, is the high tide which lifts you easily off the bar of the senses where you have so long lain stranded. And to go back to this, you know, the assumption of the hand of God is molding in the firmament into the image of which you assume. So the way our brain is molding. So for example, there's a lot of like Bruce Lee and, you know, these really great and in really good books, it talks about thoughts are like water. They mold and they make. My good man, as a man thinketh, James Allen Maboo. I think it's in the first page. It says, mind is the master power that molds and makes, and man is mind, and evermore he takes. The tool of thought, and shaping what he wills, brings forth 1,000 joys, 1,000 ills. He thinks in secret, and it comes to pass. Environment is but his looking glass. If you haven't read this, which I think I've read this whole thing here in this group, you can scroll back months ago. That just lives in my heart, as a man thinketh. So our thoughts and our imaginations are like water, and it molds our lives. Just like the water molded the Grand Canyon hollow. Water's powerful. Thoughts are powerful. We mold the world around us. Let's move on. So our assumption of the wish fulfilled, it lifts the mind into prophecy in the full right sense of the word. And if you have that controlled imagination and absorbed attention, which it is possible to attain, you may be sure that all your assumption implies will come to pass. When William Blake wrote, "What seems to be is to those to whom it seems to be," he was only repeating the eternal truth. So, what seems to be is to those to whom it seems to be. It's another way of saying, if you believe it, it must be true. Whatever you believe, guess what? You're right. It must be true. Your brain is so wired that it's for survival. If you believe it, it must be true. So you're going to find evidence to support your belief. That's why it's so important to think for yourself. Don't just go along with the flock or the echoes of what's in the world around you or the people you hang out with. And that's why thinking, really, really taking a piece of, just really taking a piece of information that is given or a piece of news and not looking what other people are commenting about it, not reading articles, just sitting with it and say, what does this mean? How do I interpret this? How do I interpret this? And when I do that, I have to look up a lot of words in the dictionary. I have to look up histories of countries or things that I don't understand, why things are the way they are. Not just hopping onto someone's opinion, because who knows where they got their opinion. That's why it's so important to think individually. Think for yourself. Don't just go along with the crowd. Don't be a sheep. Okay, so it lifts the mind. Okay, William Blake. What seems to be is to those to whom it seems to be. He was only repeating the eternal truth. There is nothing unclean of itself, but to him that esteemeth anything to be unclean, to him it is unclean. So if you think something's unclean or someone's rude, then guess what? They're going to be rude. You're going to see them as rude. That's why it's so important to every day die to your old self. Renew your mind. You're brand new. Do you want someone to judge you from your past mistakes? If you had a really bad day and you met that person for the first time and then they see you again, they're like, ooh, I know them. They're a butthole. They're a jerk. It's like, would you want someone to think that of you? Don't do that to other people. People are brand new every single day. You want people to see you new and your possibilities every day. Give that same grace to others. So there is nothing unclean of itself, but to him that esteemeth anything to be unclean, to him it is unclean. Because there is nothing unclean of itself or clean of itself, you should assume the best and think only of that which is lovely and of good report. It is not superior insight. It is not superior insight, but ignorance of this law of assumption if you read into the greatness of men some littleness with which you may be familiar, or into some situation or circumstance an unfavorable conviction. What does that mean? It is not some great insight, but actually stupidity of this law of assumption. If we read into the greatness of men some littleness with which you may be familiar, or into some situation or circumstance, an unfavorable conviction. I'm going to have to read that a few more times. And we read this so many times. That's why it's so important to really dive into this. I've read this chapter multiple times, and this particular sentence is hitting in a different way. That's good. Your particular relationship to another influences your assumption with respect to that other and makes you see in him or her that which you do see. If you can change your opinion of another, then what you now believe of them cannot be absolutely true, but is only relatively true. Our experience, our thoughts, everything's relative, depending on where we set our temperature and point. Your particular relationship to another influences your assumption with respect to that other and makes you see in them that which you do see. If you can change your opinion of another, then what you now believe of them cannot be absolutely true, but is only relatively true. The following is an actual case history illustrating how the law of assumption works. This is so good. Listen up. One day, a costume designer described to me her difficulties in working with a prominent theatrical producer. She was convinced that he unjustly criticized and rejected her best work, and that often he was deliberately rude and unfair to her. Upon hearing her story, I explained that if she found the other rude and unfair, it was a sure sign that she herself was wanting, and that it was not the producer, but herself that was in need of a new attitude. I told her that the power of this law of assumption and its practical application could be discovered only through experience, and that only by assuming that the situation was already what she wanted it to be could she prove that she could bring about the change that she desired. Her employer was merely bearing witness, telling her by his behavior what her concept of him was. I suggested that it was quite probable that she was carrying on conversations with him in her mind, which were filled with criticism and recriminations. There was no doubt but that she was mentally arguing with the producer, for others only echo that which we whisper to them in secret. Oh, that's good. I asked her if it was not true that she talked to him mentally, and if so, what those conversations were like. She confessed that every morning on her way to the theater, she told him just what she thought of him, in a way she would never have dared address him in person. The intensity and force of her mental arguments with him automatically established his behavior toward her. She began to realize that all of us carry on mental conversations, but unfortunately, on most occasions, these conversations are argumentative, that we have only to observe the passerby on the street to prove this assertion. That so many people are mentally engrossed in conversation, and few appear to be happy about it. But the very intensity of their feeling must lead them quickly to the unpleasant incident they themselves have mentally created and therefore must now encounter. When she realized what she had been doing, she agreed to change her attitude and to live this law faithfully. by assuming that her job was highly satisfactory and her relationship with the producer was a very happy one. To do this, she agreed that before going to sleep at night, on her way to work, and at other intervals during the day, she would imagine that he had congratulated her on her fine designs and that she, in turn, had thanked him for his praise and kindness. To her great delight, she soon discovered for herself that her own attitude was the cause of all that befell her. The behavior of her employer miraculously reversed itself, his attitude echoing, as it had always done, that which she had assumed now reflected her changed concept of him. What she did was by the power of her imagination. Her persistent assumption influenced his behavior and determined his attitude toward her. With the passport of desire on the wings of a controlled imagination, she traveled into the future of her own predetermined experience. Thus we see it is not facts, but that which we create in our imagination which shape our lives. For most of the conflicts of the day are due to the want of a little imagination to cast the beam out of our own eye. Thus we see it is not facts, but that which we create in our imagination which shapes our lives. For most of the conflicts of the day are due to want of a little imagination to cast the beam out of our own eye. It is the exact and literal minded who live in a fictitious world. Isn't that just opposite to what we're taught or what we believe? It is the exact and literal minded, people who take things literal and as they take things as they are. They actually live in a fictitious world. Because what is reality? We think the real world is outside of us, but the real world is the world behind our eye, the inside world. Because that's what creates the outside world. Woof. By the intensity of her imagination and feeling, the designer cast a kind of enchantment on her producer's mind and caused him to think that his generous praise originated with him. Often our most elaborate and original thoughts are determined by another. We should never be certain that it was not some woman treading in the winepress who began the subtle change in men's mind, or that the passion did not begin in the mind of some shepherd boy, lighting up his eyes for a moment before it ran upon its way. William Butler Yeats. That was a little excerpt from a poem that is a little heady. I have to read that a few more times. I love this chapter on attitude. The Power of Awareness, Neville Goddard, chapter 7. People treat us, we determine how people treat us by our attitude. If you have a good attitude, like we touched on yesterday, if you're positive, thinking good thoughts, in a good mood, what a coincidence that you seem to experience others the same way. People, everyone, just echo what we are reflecting. Remember, the world is not as it is. We don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are, which gives us ultimate freedom and power because we're in total control of how we are. No matter what's happening on the outside world, no matter what happens, if we take care of ourselves, our mind, take control of our imagination and our thoughts, and we keep ourselves in a positive state, we will therefore experience, we will look for, our mind will look for all the positive things. And it's okay to have those times of struggle, those times of doubt. That's good too, because that's when you learn what is it there to teach you. Emotions and feelings aren't good or bad. They are all equal and valid. I feel depressed and sad and I have my days. I call my inner Maleficent my part when I'm just real surly. I embrace that. I do not subscribe to the whole idea of like positivity all the time, blah, blah. No, not at all. And a lot of people get that confused with personal development or positive thinking or positive psychology. But anyways, back to this attitude. What is your attitude like today? Attitude check. Thursday, July, mid-year. What's your attitude like? Is it good? Do you have a good attitude, a good outlook? What kind of goggles are you wearing? Are they dirty? Do you need to clean them off? Put a new pair on? Do you have a good attitude? Yeah. There was this funny where I did a speech in Toastmasters on attitude, and it was like there was a quote, a, a bad attitude is like a flat tire. It'll get you nowhere. I'm sure we've all worked with people with bad attitudes, even if they're talented, even if they're a shoe-in for whatever. They have a bad attitude, it's not going to work out. Nobody gets anywhere with a bad attitude. Even you've seen those young spunky people, or like people who aren't jaded and all like bitter and cynical. They don't know how to do something and they come in with a peppy attitude, and then someone gives them all this responsibility. You're like, how the hell did they move up so fast? Because they had a good attitude. People want to be around them. And this was a beautiful example of this costume designer and the theatrical producer. This costume designer found herself experiencing in her mind this theatrical producer criticizing her and just being rude. Well, Neville had a conversation with her and said, well, what's your attitude towards him? What do you think about him? Are you arguing with him in your head? Let's think about how many times we're arguing with people in our head, finding ways to be right, rehearsing monologues of I'm going to tell them, or these people, that people you don't agree with. You're arguing your point. That puts you in a bad state. Have a good attitude, an open mind, and the world and the people around you will reflect back to you that attitude. And it's a mental muscle. Love this. Power of Awareness, Chapter 7, Attitude, Neville Goddard. As always, thank you for joining me on Inside Talk Show. It's an inside job. We go inside, we dive in, we shut out all the senses, and we really chew on some food for thought. If you're interested in my morning calls, please message me. I would love to have you. We study Neville Goddard every morning. It's a really good intimate group. It's a Zoom group, and we really set our morning and our day, or if it's afternoon for you, it's a really nice reset. We got a couple big announcements. Me and a friend are going to start something on Wednesday nights. Or no, Wednesday mornings, actually. East Coast, it'll be 1 p.m., so in the afternoon. And over here, Pacific time, it's going to be 10 a.m. So that's another great way to start your Wednesday. It's like a midweek mindset reset. Wednesdays, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. But more details to come on that. Very excited. Love y'all. It's always a pleasure. I will see you tomorrow.